The quiet student Maya Chun stood at the observation deck of the transport shuttle, watching the moon Kaulos, 7 grow larger through the reinforced viewport. The silvery surface was dotted with gleaming structures that seemed to defy the laws of physics she had learned back on Earth. Floating spires twisted upward like frozen tornadoes, connected by bridges that sparkled with energy fields. This was her destination. The Zephyrian Military Academy, the most prestigious military institution in known space. The 19-year-old human pressed her palm against the cool metal of the viewport. 3 months ago, she had been helping her parents manage their cattle station in the harsh Australian outback. Now she was about to study alongside the galaxy's brightest military minds. The irony wasn't lost on her. While her classmates came from advanced civilizations with technology that seemed like magic, she came from a place where her family still had to manually repair water pumps and track livestock on foot when the hoverbikes broke down. The shuttle's docking clamps engaged with a soft thrum that Maya felt through the deck plating. Around her, the other passengers began gathering their belongings. Most wore the elaborate dress uniforms of their respective species, marking them as military officers or academy graduates. Maya looked down at her simple Earth clothes, practical boots, durable pants, and a plain shirt that had survived countless days working under the brutal Australian sun. She had one formal uniform packed away, but it seemed plain compared to the ornate designs around her. As Maya disembarked, she was immediately struck by the controlled chaos of the Academy's main reception area. Students from dozens of species moved through the vast space with purpose. She recognized some from the orientation materials. The tall, graceful Zephyrians with their luminescent skin patterns that shifted like aurora displays. The compact, heavily armored Caraxians whose every movement produced small sparks from their bioelectric systems. The ethereal Luminari, who seemed to glide rather than walk, leaving faint trails of light in their wake. What caught Maya's attention most, however, was how they all moved. Each species had adapted their natural abilities for military precision. The Zephyrians' light patterns conveyed complex tactical information to their fellows. The Caraxians' electrical fields allowed them to interface directly with technology. The Luminari could literally see electromagnetic fields, making them natural reconnaissance specialists. Maya wondered what abilities humans brought to this mix, besides their reputation for being surprisingly difficult to kill. The registration process was efficient but overwhelming. Maya found herself assigned to Advanced Strategic Studies, Section 7, along with 11 other students representing 12 different species. The automated guide system, sensing her human biometrics, activated in standard Galactic with Earth-appropriate visual cues. As she followed the glowing pathway through corridors lined with holographic displays of famous battles, Maya couldn't help but notice how the Academy celebrated military genius from across the galaxy. Her dormitory was in the human wing, a recent addition to accommodate Earth's growing presence in galactic affairs. The rooms were designed to Earth-standard gravity and atmosphere, which was a relief after the shuttle's artificial environment. Maya unpacked her few belongings, placing a small photo of her family's cattle station on the desk. In the image, her parents stood beside their old water bore, with thousands of acres of red dirt and hardy cattle stretching to the horizon. It seemed impossibly far from this place of gleaming technology and academic prestige. That evening, Maya attended her first orientation session with her study group. The meeting room was a marvel of adaptive architecture, with seats that adjusted automatically to accommodate each species' physiology. The lighting shifted to optimal spectrums for different visual systems, and the atmospheric mix was carefully balanced to be breathable for all present. Her classmates were an impressive group. Zaxime, a Zephyrian whose light patterns indicated high analytical intelligence, was already discussing quantum tactical theory with Threshka, a Caraxian whose bioelectric field hummed with constant calculation. Siler, a Luminari whose form seemed to exist partially in dimensions Maya couldn't quite perceive, contributed insights about energy flow dynamics that made the others pause in respectful attention. Maya listened carefully, noting how each student approached problems from the perspective of their species' natural advantages. The Zephyrians thought in terms of information networks and parallel processing. The Coraxians analyzed everything through mathematical models and electrical patterns. The Luminari considered energy states and quantum possibilities. Each approach was sophisticated and bore the mark of civilizations that had been refining military science for millennia. When the instructor asked for introductions, Maya's turn came last. The room fell quiet as 11 pairs of alien eyes focused on her. She could feel their curiosity and, perhaps, their skepticism. Humans were the newcomers, the species that had only recently developed faster-than-light travel. Their planet was classified as a death world in the Galactic database, but that designation said more about its lethality than its inhabitants' capabilities. "I'm Maya Chun," she said simply. "I'm from Earth, from a cattle station in what we call the Australian outback. My family has been managing livestock in some of the harshest conditions on our planet for 4 generations. The silence that followed wasn't hostile, but it was profound." Maya could see her classmates processing this information. While they came from military academies, noble houses, or advanced research institutions, she came from what sounded like agricultural work. The contrast was stark. Zaxheim's light patterns shifted to indicate polite confusion. "Agricultural management," he said carefully, "is certainly valuable work. However, this academy focuses on strategic military applications. Perhaps there has been some administrative error." Maya shook her head gently. "No error. On Earth, survival often requires the same skills as military strategy: resource management, threat assessment, contingency planning. When you're responsible for keeping thousands of animals alive in an environment that regularly tries to kill them, you learn to think strategically." Threshka's bioelectric field pulsed with what Maya was learning to recognize as analytical interest. Your planet's environmental hostility is documented. However, agricultural challenges seem quite different from military operations. "Are they?" Maya asked quietly. "When drought threatens your water supply, you need logistics planning. When predators threaten your livestock, you need tactical response. When equipment fails hundreds of kilometers from help, you need to improvise solutions with whatever resources you have. When a bushfire threatens everything you've worked for, you need to make decisions that could save or destroy your family's livelihood." She paused, meeting each of their gazes in turn. "My great-grandmother used to say that the outback doesn't care about your theories or your technology. It only cares whether you can survive what it throws at you. Military strategy isn't much different." The room remained quiet, but Maya sensed a shift in her classmates' attention. She wasn't challenging their expertise, but she was suggesting that her background might be more relevant than it initially appeared. Over the following days, Maya settled into the Academy's routine. She attended lectures on galactic military history, studied theoretical frameworks for interspecies conflict resolution, and participated in simulation exercises that tested everything from logistics coordination to diplomatic negotiation. In each class, she observed more than she spoke, listening carefully to how her classmates approached problems. What struck her most was how sophisticated their thinking was, and how that sophistication sometimes worked against them. When presented with a tactical problem, her classmates would immediately begin constructing elaborate models, considering dozens of variables and potential outcomes. Their solutions were masterworks of military theory, incorporating centuries of accumulated wisdom from their respective civilizations. Maya found herself thinking differently. When she looked at a tactical scenario, she didn't see abstract models or theoretical frameworks. She saw resource problems, timing issues, and practical constraints. It was the same mindset she had developed managing cattle in the outback, where theoretical solutions meant nothing if you couldn't implement them with broken equipment in 100-degree heat. During one particularly complex exercise involving multidimensional battlefield coordination, Maya watched her classmates spend hours developing a sophisticated solution that required perfect timing, flawless communication, and resources that might not be available in real combat conditions. Their approach was brilliant in its complexity, accounting for variables that Maya hadn't even considered. When the instructor asked for her analysis, Maya hesitated. Her approach was simpler, more direct, and probably seemed primitive compared to the elegant solutions her classmates had proposed. But it was also more practical, requiring fewer resources and less coordination while achieving the same objective. Well, the instructor prompted, his tone suggesting this was more courtesy than genuine interest in her perspective. Maya looked around the room at her classmates, all of whom had demonstrated intelligence and creativity that impressed her. They weren't wrong in their approaches. They were just thinking like people whose civilizations had always had abundant resources and advanced technology to solve problems. I think, Maya said carefully, that all these solutions assume optimal conditions. What happens when the communication systems fail, or when you don't have the resources the plan requires, or when the enemy does something completely unexpected? The question hung in the air, unanswered but thought-provoking. Maya wasn't trying to criticize her classmates' work, but she was pointing out something that her Earthborn perspective made obvious. Plans that worked perfectly in theory often failed catastrophically in practice. As the days passed, Maya began to notice something interesting. Her classmates were brilliant theorists, but their brilliance was built on assumptions about how warfare should work according to established doctrine. Maya's perspective, shaped by a lifetime of dealing with unpredictable challenges in an unforgiving environment, approached problems from a different angle entirely. She didn't know it yet, but this difference in perspective was about to become very important indeed. The impossible battle simulation, the announcement came during Maya's third week at the academy. Commander Vextar, the institution's most legendary instructor, would be conducting a special session with their advanced study group. Maya had heard whispers about Vextar throughout the academy. The Altarian commander was a living legend, having served in 17 major conflicts across 4 different galactic regions. His tactical innovations were still studied centuries after he had developed them, and his mere presence at the academy was considered one of its greatest honors. As Maya entered the specialized simulation chamber, she was struck by its impressive technology. The room could generate completely immersive holographic environments, complete with tactical data streams, environmental variables, and AI-controlled opposition forces that learned and adapted in real time. Students could experience everything from single-ship engagements to massive fleet actions, all while the system monitored their decision-making processes and provided detailed analysis afterward. Commander Vextar stood at the center of the chamber, his 4 arms gesturing gracefully as he spoke. The Altarian's crystalline exoskeleton caught and reflected the room's lighting, creating patterns that seemed to shift with his emotional state. Currently, those patterns suggested focused intensity mixed with something Maya couldn't quite identify. Anticipation, perhaps, or maybe amusement. Today, Vextar announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding fleets, "You will face the Nexus Prime scenario. This simulation has been a cornerstone of our advanced curriculum for over 200 years. It presents a tactical situation that has never been successfully resolved by any student in the Academy's history." Maya felt her classmates' excitement and nervousness spike simultaneously. Around her, Zaxheim's light patterns shifted to indicate analytical eagerness, while Freshka's bioelectric field hummed with increased activity. Siler seemed to become even more translucent, as if preparing to perceive dimensions beyond normal spacetime. The scenario, Vextar continued, involves the defense of a critical resource nexus against overwhelming enemy forces. The defender has limited resources, restricted mobility, and faces an opponent with superior numbers and technology. Traditional military doctrine suggests the position is indefensible. Yet, historically, such positions have occasionally been held through innovative tactical thinking. The holographic display, activated, showing a complex 3-dimensional battlefield. Maya studied it carefully, noting the terrain features, resource distributions, and strategic positions. The defending force was positioned around what appeared to be a mining operation on an asteroid field, surrounded by enemy fleets that outnumbered them significantly. "The rules are simple," Vextar explained. "You have complete tactical control over the defending forces. You may request additional intelligence, modify defensive positions, and coordinate all military assets. However, you cannot change the fundamental parameters. You are outnumbered, outgunned, and have limited mobility. Your objective is to prevent the enemy from capturing the resource nexus for 72 hours, at which point reinforcements will arrive. Maya listened as her classmates began analyzing the scenario. Their approaches were immediately sophisticated and comprehensive. Zaxheim started calculating probability matrices for different defensive configurations. Threshka began modeling energy distribution patterns to optimize shield deployments. Seiler attempted to identify quantum uncertainty factors that might be exploited for tactical advantage. The first attempt came from Krillex, a saurian whose species was renowned for their strategic patience and long-term planning. His approach involved creating layered defensive positions with overlapping fields of fire, using the asteroid field's natural obstacles to channel enemy advances into predetermined killing zones. The simulation ran for 6 hours of compressed time before the defenses were overwhelmed by the enemy's numerical superiority. Zaxheim tried next, implementing a dynamic defense strategy that used real-time intelligence to constantly reorganize defensive positions. His light patterns flickered rapidly as he coordinated complex maneuvers, but ultimately the defenders were ground down by attrition. The enemy simply had too many resources to waste. Threshka's attempt focused on technological solutions, using the defenders' advanced systems to maximum efficiency. She calculated optimal firing solutions, managed power distribution with mathematical precision, and even attempted to hack enemy systems through electromagnetic interference. Her approach lasted longer than the others, but eventually succumbed to the same fundamental problem. There simply weren't enough defenders to hold all the necessary positions. One by one, Maya's classmates attempted the scenario. Each brought their species' particular strengths to bear on the problem. The Vorlian student tried stealth tactics, using cloaking technology and misdirection to confuse the attackers. The hegemony representative attempted diplomatic solutions, trying to divide the enemy through negotiation and psychological warfare. The Crystalline Collective student even tried to weaponize the mining equipment, turning resource extraction tools into improvised defensive systems. Every attempt failed. As the session progressed, Maya noticed something interesting about her classmates' approaches. They were all incredibly sophisticated, incorporating advanced technology, complex mathematical models, and centuries of accumulated military wisdom. But they all shared certain assumptions about how warfare should be conducted. They assumed that superior technology would prevail, that numerical advantages could be overcome through tactical brilliance, and that the enemy would behave according to established military doctrine. Commander Vextar watched each attempt with the same patient attention, providing detailed analysis after each failure. His crystalline patterns suggested he was neither surprised nor disappointed by the results. This was clearly expected. The scenario, he explained after the final attempt, is based on actual historical events. The Battle of Kepler Station during the third expansion remains one of the most studied defensive actions in galactic military history. The defenders were outnumbered 15-1, had no possibility of retreat, and faced an enemy equipped with superior technology. According to every mathematical model, every strategic analysis, and every tactical computer, they should have been overrun within hours. Maya leaned forward slightly, her interest piqued. This sounded familiar in a way that had nothing to do with military history. Instead, Vextar continued. They held for 3 days, inflicting casualties at a ratio of 7-1 and ultimately forcing the enemy to abandon their assault. The defense succeeded not through technological superiority or numerical advantage, but through an approach that no military computer had predicted and no strategic doctrine had prepared for. The room fell silent as her classmates absorbed this information. Maya could sense their frustration and confusion. If the position had been successfully defended in reality, why couldn't they replicate that success in simulation? The historical commander, Vextar, said, his patterns now clearly indicating amusement, was human. Maya felt every eye in the room turned toward her. The weight of their expectations was sudden and intense. Her classmates had spent hours attempting this scenario with all their technological advantages and theoretical knowledge. Now, they were looking at her, the agricultural worker from the Deathworld, as if she might somehow possess insights they lacked. Maya studied the holographic display again, but this time she wasn't thinking like a military strategist. Instead, she found herself thinking about the year the drought had lasted 18 months longer than predicted. Her family's cattle station had been isolated with limited water reserves and no possibility of moving the herd to better pasture. Every day had been about rationing resources, making difficult decisions about which animals to save, and finding creative ways to extend their supplies until the rains returned. The enemy forces in the simulation were acting like the drought, relentless, patient, and willing to wait for the defenders to exhaust themselves. Her classmates had been thinking like ranchers trying to fight the weather, using technology and tactics to overcome a force that couldn't be defeated through conventional means. But Maya's family hadn't tried to fight the drought. They had learned to live with it. "Commander," Maya said quietly, "may I attempt the scenario?" Vextar's patterns shifted to what she was learning to recognize as pleased anticipation. "Of course. Please, take your position at the command interface." Maya approached the holographic display, aware that her classmates were watching her every move. She could sense their curiosity, mixed with skepticism. They had all applied centuries of accumulated military wisdom to this problem and failed. What could she possibly do differently? As Maya activated the command interface, she realized she was about to find out whether her grandmother's lessons about surviving in the outback had any relevance to defending a resource nexus in space. The answer would determine whether human perspectives on warfare were merely primitive or unexpectedly valuable. The simulation initialized, and Maya found herself in command of a force that every military doctrine said was doomed to failure. But as she studied the tactical display, she wasn't thinking about military doctrine at all. She was thinking about cattle, water rights, and the hard-earned wisdom of people who had learned to survive in places where survival seemed impossible. The real test was about to begin. The moment of truth. Maya stood before the command interface, her hands hovering over controls that could direct the fate of thousands of simulated defenders. The holographic display showed her the same impossible situation that had defeated 11 of the galaxy's brightest military minds. Enemy fleets surrounded the resource nexus like predators circling wounded prey, their superior numbers and technology seemingly guaranteeing victory. But Maya wasn't seeing a military engagement. She was seeing something far more familiar, a resource management crisis under extreme pressure. Simulation parameters confirmed, the AI announced, defending force, 847 vessels of various classifications. Attacking force, 12,847 vessels. Tactical disadvantage ratio, 15.2 to 1. Mission duration, 72 hours. Failure condition, enemy control of primary resource extraction facilities. Maya's classmates watched in silence as she began her analysis. Instead of immediately deploying defensive formations or calculating optimal firing solutions, she did something none of them had thought to do. She studied the resource nexus itself. The mining operation was vast, spanning dozens of asteroids connected by transport tubes and processing facilities. Raw materials flowed through the system in carefully managed streams, refined and prepared for shipment to industrial centers across the galaxy. Maya traced these flows with her finger, noting bottlenecks, storage facilities, and critical processing nodes. Interesting approach, Commander Vextar observed, his crystalline patterns indicating professional curiosity. Most students focus immediately on defensive positions. Maya nodded absently, still studying the resource flows. My grandmother always said you can't defend what you don't understand. Before you can protect something, you need to know what it actually is. She activated deeper analytical functions, revealing information her classmates had overlooked in their rush to establish defensive perimeters. The resource nexus wasn't just a mining operation, it was a complete industrial ecosystem. refineries, manufacturing facilities, power generation stations, life support systems, and transportation networks all functioned as an integrated whole. Computer, Maya said, "Show me resource consumption patterns for the attacking fleet." The display shifted, revealing data that made several of her classmates gasp in surprise. The enemy force was massive, but that size came with enormous logistical requirements. Their ships needed fuel, ammunition, spare parts, and consumables to maintain their siege. More importantly, they needed those resources continuously throughout their operation. "Show me supply lines for the attacking force," Maya continued. Red lines appeared on the display, tracing the enemy's logistical network back to their nearest supply bases. Maya studied these carefully, noting distances, capacity limitations, and vulnerability points. Her classmates had been thinking about the battle as a self-contained engagement, but Maya saw it as part of a larger system that included economics, logistics, and resource management. "Computer, what happens to the enemy fleet if their supply lines are disrupted?" "Tactical effectiveness would degrade over time," the AI responded. "Ammunition depletion would occur within 18 to 24 hours for energy weapons, 36 to 48 hours for kinetic systems. Fuel reserves would last approximately 60 hours at current consumption rates." Maya smiled slightly. This was starting to make sense instead of positioning her forces to maximize defensive firepower. Maya began redeploying them in a pattern that seemed almost random to her observers. Small groups of ships moved to positions that offered no obvious tactical advantages. Others were assigned to escort missions that seemed to serve no military purpose. "What is she doing?" whispered Zaxheim, his light patterns flickering with confusion. Maya was doing what her family had done during the Great Drought, changing the rules of engagement. While her classmates had been thinking about how to fight a superior enemy force, Maya was thinking about how to make it impossible for that force to maintain its superiority. During the drought, her family couldn't make it rain, but they could control how water was used, distributed, and conserved. Similarly, Maya couldn't defeat the enemy fleet in direct combat, but she could control the resources they needed to fight. "Computer, begin implementation of Scenario Plan Chinalpha." The simulation accepted her commands and began executing a strategy that left her classmates stunned. Instead of engaging the enemy fleet directly, Maya's forces began a series of seemingly unrelated operations throughout the asteroid field. Mining ships continued extracting resources, but now they were also laying sensor networks and communication relays. Transport vessels maintained their regular schedules, but their cargo holds now contained military supplies distributed to hidden cache points throughout the system. Even the civilian workforce continued their normal duties while simultaneously preparing defensive positions and backup facilities. The enemy fleet, following standard doctrine, began their assault by targeting obvious military installations. They destroyed defensive platforms, eliminated patrol ships, and systematically reduced the Nexus's military capabilities. According to every tactical analysis system, they were winning decisively. But Maya wasn't trying to win a military victory. She was trying to survive until help arrived. As the simulation progressed, strange things began happening to the attacking fleet. Their long-range reconnaissance patrols started reporting equipment malfunctions and communication failures. Supply convoys found their routes blocked by debris fields that hadn't been there before. Sensor networks began providing inconsistent data about defender positions and capabilities. "How is she doing this?" Threshka demanded, her bioelectric field crackling with frustrated analysis. The tactical computers show the defenders losing every engagement. Commander Vextar's patterns indicated growing appreciation. "She's not fighting battles," he observed. "She's changing the environment." Maya's strategy became clearer as the simulation continued. She had turned the entire asteroid field into a weapon. Mining charges became improvised explosives that created debris clouds to blind enemy sensors. Industrial equipment was repurposed to generate electromagnetic interference that disrupted enemy communications. Transport tubes became booby traps that damaged ships attempting to use them for tactical advantage. Most importantly, Maya had created a distributed network of hidden supply caches throughout the system. While the enemy fleet gradually consumed their own supplies, fighting a conventional battle, Maya's forces were being constantly resupplied from stockpiles they had built during the simulation's early phases. That be why the 30-hour mark, the tactical balance began shifting. The enemy fleet was still numerically superior, but their effectiveness was degrading as fuel ran low and ammunition reserves dwindled. Their supply lines were under constant harassment from small raider groups that appeared without warning, struck critical targets, and vanished into the asteroid field's maze of tunnels and debris. "This is impossible," muttered Krillex, his reptilian features showing confusion. No military doctrine accounts for this approach. Maya glanced at her classmates, noting their bewilderment. They were trying to understand her strategy through the lens of conventional military thinking, but she wasn't using conventional military thinking. She was using the survival instincts of a species that had learned to thrive in environments that actively tried to kill them. "Computer," Maya said as the simulation entered its final phase, "status report on enemy fleet capability. Attacking force effectiveness now at 34% of initial capacity," the AI reported. "Fuel reserves critically low. Ammunition stocks depleted. Supply line efficiency reduced to 12% of optimal." The enemy commander, an AI programmed with the tactical knowledge of dozens of species, began making increasingly desperate decisions. Frontal assaults replaced careful maneuvering. Ships broke formation to conserve fuel. The coordinated fleet action that had seemed so overwhelming at the beginning devolved into individual ship actions as communication networks failed and command. Structures collapsed. At the 60-hour mark, something unprecedented happened. The enemy fleet began withdrawing. "Simulation complete," the AI announced. "Defending forces maintain control of primary objectives. Mission success achieved with 18% defending force casualties." The chamber fell silent. Maya's classmates stared at the tactical display in disbelief, trying to process what they had just witnessed. The impossible scenario, the tactical puzzle that had stumped military minds for 2 centuries, had been solved by a 19-year-old human who had approached it like a resource management problem. Commander Vextar approached Maya, his crystalline patterns displaying something that might have been pride. "Outstanding work," he said formally. "Your solution demonstrates tactical thinking we have not seen at this academy before." Maya felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment. "I didn't really solve anything," she said quietly. "I just treated it like managing cattle during a drought." "Explain," Vextar requested, and Maya realized the entire class was hanging on her words. "During the drought, we couldn't fight the weather," Maya began, searching for words to explain concepts that seemed obvious to her. "We couldn't make it rain or cool down the temperature. So we stopped trying to fight it and started working with it instead." She gestured to the holographic display. The enemy fleet was like the drought, powerful, patient, and impossible to defeat directly. But they needed resources to maintain that power. So instead of fighting their strength, I worked to eliminate their ability to sustain it. Zaxheim's light patterns shifted rapidly as he processed this explanation. "You transformed a military engagement into an economic competition. More than that," Threshka added, her bioelectric field humming with new understanding. "She changed the fundamental nature of the conflict itself." Maya nodded. "On Earth, we have a saying, you can't control the weather, but you can control how you respond to it. The enemy fleet was a force of nature, just like drought or bushfire or flood. You don't defeat forces of nature through direct confrontation. You survive them by being smarter, more adaptable, and more resourceful than they expect." Seiler, speaking in harmonics that barely registered in audible frequencies, offered an observation that the translator rendered as, "The human approach suggests that tactical superiority may be less important than environmental adaptation." Commander Vextar's patterns indicated deep thought. The historical Battle of Kepler Station was one using precisely this approach, he confirmed. The human commander, faced with impossible odds, chose not to fight a conventional battle, but to turn the entire star system into a resource trap. The enemy fleet found itself extended beyond its logistical capabilities and was forced to withdraw despite tactical superiority. Maya looked around at her classmates, seeing new respect in their alien features. They had approached the problem with all the sophisticated military knowledge their civilizations had accumulated over millennia. She had approached it with the practical wisdom of people who had learned to survive in places where survival seemed impossible. This is why humans interest us so much, Vextar continued, addressing the entire class. Your species brings perspectives to warfare that we had not previously considered. Where we see tactical problems, you see resource management challenges. Where we see military doctrine, you see environmental adaptation. Maya felt a strange mixture of pride and humility. She hadn't solved the simulation through superior intelligence or advanced technology. She had solved it by thinking like someone whose ancestors had survived ice ages, plagues, famines, and countless other challenges that had seemed insurmountable at the time that the session concluded and her classmates filed out of the chamber. Many paused to speak with Maya. Their questions revealed genuine curiosity about human approaches to problem solving, and Maya found herself explaining concepts that seemed elementary to her, but revolutionary to them. The Outback had taught her that survival wasn't about being stronger than your environment. It was about being more adaptable, more resourceful, and more stubborn than the challenges you faced. Those lessons, learned while managing cattle in one of Earth's harshest regions, had somehow proven applicable to defending resource stations in the depths of space. Later that evening, Maya sat in her dormitory room, looking at the photo of her family's cattle station. The red dirt and hardy cattle seemed impossibly far from the gleaming corridors of the Zephyria Military Academy, but she was beginning to understand that the distance wasn't as great as she had thought. Whether you were defending livestock from drought or defending a resource nexus from enemy fleets, the fundamental challenge was the same. Survive long enough for conditions to change in your favor. It was a lesson that her great-grandmother had learned from the Outback, and that Maya had now shared with the galaxy. The universe, it seemed, was full of opportunities for those who knew how to adapt, persist, and think differently about what seemed like impossible problems. Maya smiled, thinking that her grandmother would have been proud to know that her lessons about surviving in the Outback had helped solve tactical problems that had puzzled the galaxy's greatest military minds, that in the end, it hadn't been about superior technology or advanced tactics. It had been about the simple, stubborn human refusal to accept that any problem was truly unsolvable. Sometimes the best solutions came not from the most sophisticated minds, but from those who had learned to survive by thinking differently about what survival actually meant.